Language
of
lust.
You? Yeah, you've spoken this language before. Probably more than once. No translator, no teacher, you didn't need either. Because lust has its own alphabet. It lives in a glance, a pause, the way your chest tightens just before you speak, and then you don't. We call it chemistry, energy, tension. But really, it's a language, one of the oldest, one that never needed words. What's strange is we all think we understand it, but most people walk through life fluently mumbling lust, never quite realizing what they're saying or how they're being heard. It's not taught in school. You don't learn it from your parents. You absorb it. Subtly, watching how people lean in, how they pull back, the breath that quickens in silence, the heat that starts before touch ever happens. And the truth is, lust has shaped more of your life than you realize. It's steered conversations, started friendships that shouldn't have happened, pulled you into relationships you thought were about love, but weren't. According to researchers at the Kinsey Institute, lust is primarily driven by androgens and estrogens, hormones that spark not just desire, but behavior. But even beyond biology, it lives in the social and psychological cues we send and receive. A study from Emory University once found that the brain activity during intense lust overlaps with areas tied to motivation, reward, and even addiction. So why do we treat it like it's something casual, fleeting? Why do we downplay it like it's just a phase of attraction or a precursor to something more respectable? Maybe because we're uncomfortable with how much control it really has over us, or how little control we have over it. But if you slow down, if you really pay attention, you start to notice how detailed it is, how intentional. The eyes don't just look, they linger. The body doesn't just stand, it angles. The voice doesn't just speak, it dips, pauses, softens. That's the language we're about to unpack. And no, this isn't about how to get someone. This is about recognizing what we've been saying all along without ever opening our mouths. Because if you've ever sat across from someone and felt something electric pass between you, you've already spoken it, you just didn't know the words. Let's get something straight early. Lust isn't a shallow feeling. It's not just about what happens below the belt or behind closed doors. Lust is far more layered than the way people reduce it to impulse or temptation. So what are we really talking about when we say lust? Most people confuse it with wanting someone's body, but lust is the urge beneath the want. It's not about what you do. It's about what builds before you act. What fills the space between two people when nothing has even happened yet. That heat, that pull, that sudden awareness of someone else's presence in the room, that's the core of it. It's physical, yes, but it's also mental. Sometimes even more mental than physical. Have you ever been drawn to someone's energy before you even fully processed what they looked like? You weren't making a list in your head about their features. You were feeling something. And that's where lust begins. In the body, sure, but also in attention, in imagination, in possibility. Neuroscientists have found that lust activates the hypothalamus and amygdala, the parts of the brain responsible for survival instincts and emotion. It's rooted in something primitive, which is why it often bypasses logic entirely. But even though it's primal, that doesn't make it unintelligent. Think about how selective it actually is. You don't lust after every attractive person you meet. There's a specificity to it, a timing, an unspoken compatibility that clicks into place or doesn't. That's why someone can be considered beautiful, but leave you completely cold. And someone else, who doesn't check a single box on your usual type, suddenly has your full attention, and you don't know why. And maybe that's what makes lust so hard to talk about without reducing it. It refuses to be clean. It moves through eye contact, timing, shared silence. It's reactive, but not random. Most importantly, it's not just about sex. That's where a lot of people get it wrong. You can feel lust without ever acting on it. And sometimes you do act and realize it was never about the act in the first place. So why does this matter? Because if you can't define what you're feeling, you can't decide what to do with it. You either let it pull you around or you learn to notice it, question it, work with it. Ask yourself, when was the last time you felt deeply pulled to someone? What did you actually want from them? Was it closeness? Was it to be seen? Or was it just the feeling of being wanted back? See, lust often isn't even about the other person. It's about the part of you that wakes up in their presence. That's where the real story begins. Now that we've broken down what lust actually is, let's talk about how it's communicated without saying a single word. Because before anyone speaks, before a message is typed or a compliment lands, there's already something happening, something quieter, and way more powerful. This is the part most people miss. Lust speaks long before your mouth does. Let's start with eye contact. You've felt it before. That moment where someone's gaze holds yours just a second longer than it should. Not aggressive, not shy either, just enough to stir something. It's subtle, but it cuts straight through whatever else is going on. There's a term in behavioral psychology called mutual gaze, and when it lasts more than 3 seconds, the brain starts to register emotional and physical arousal. Not because of what's said, because of what's felt. Prolonged eye contact can trigger the release of oxytocin, often called the bonding hormone. That's part of why even a short, unbroken stare can feel so intimate and so risky. Then there's how people position themselves. If someone's feet are pointed toward you in a room full of people, or if they lean in just slightly during a casual conversation, they're saying something. Even the smallest shift of body language, mirroring your movements, angling slightly forward, those are microsignals. You probably do them without noticing, but someone else is picking up on it. You've likely heard of pupil dilation as a signal of attraction. It's real, it's unconscious, and it happens fast, in low light, during excitement, or when we're drawn to someone, the pupils widen. You can't fake it, you can't control it, but it sends a message. And what about voice? People drop their tone without realizing it when they're speaking to someone they're attracted to. They slow their pace. Sometimes the words become a little softer, less performative, more present. Have you ever had a moment where someone simply asked, "What did you say?" and leaned in just slightly, and your whole body registered it before your mind caught up? That's how the language of lust works. You don't translate it, you react to it. Even silence has a role. A well-placed pause can hold more tension than a paragraph. You both know the air just shifted, but no one names it. That unnamed tension is part of the vocabulary too. And here's where it gets tricky. None of these things mean someone intends to send that message. Lust lives in implication, in suggestion. You could be standing at a bar saying nothing of interest, and your entire body might be screaming something else. So the question becomes, are you paying attention? Most people aren't. They miss the cues or misread them completely. That's how things get messy. That's how wires get crossed. Because when you don't understand the language, you start speaking it by accident. Let's shift from what's silent to what finally gets said. Because once lust finds its way into conversation, everything changes. Here's the part most people overlook. It's not always what's said that lands. It's how it's said, the tone, the pace, the space between words. When someone lowers their voice or pauses before finishing a sentence, it creates tension. Not because of the meaning, but because of the feeling it carries. That kind of speech doesn't just inform, it pulls. And that's the part we're unpacking now, when words stop being practical and start feeling like touch. Think about late-night conversations, the kind where the topic shifts into that gray area, past casual, not quite obvious. You start saying things you wouldn't during daylight. The language gets looser. There's room for ambiguity. A compliment slips in, not fully formed. A question gets asked that wouldn't make sense at noon. And suddenly, you're not just talking, you're circling something. It's in the phrasing too. Someone might say, "I probably shouldn't tell you this," or "You really shouldn't look at me like that." On paper, that sounds basic. But in context, it's a spark. Not because the lines are clever, because the subtext is doing all the work. Now, this isn't about rehearsed lines. Most people can smell a performance from miles away. What actually draws someone in is presence. Being locked into the moment, listening closely, responding slowly. Because here's what no one says out loud. Lust loves patience. It feeds off buildup, off anticipation. The writer Bell Hooks once said, "When we're able to be deeply intimate with another, we create the space for both truth and mystery." That quote fits here. Lust thrives when you're able to say something layered, something that reveals and withholds at the same time. And the irony? The more direct you try to be, the more the tension evaporates. That's why the people who chase lust through blunt, over-the-top flirting usually fail. Not because they're wrong, but because they skip the suspense. They leave nothing to imagine. Have you ever reread an old conversation and realized there was more happening between the lines than on the surface? Maybe it didn't feel like flirting at the time, but now you see it differently. That's the delayed recognition of verbal seduction. It doesn't always hit in the moment. Sometimes it lingers and returns. And when it does hit in the moment, you feel it in your stomach. That tiny shift when the tone drops, and suddenly the conversation is carrying a second meaning. One you both feel, even if neither of you names it. So ask yourself, how do you speak when you're drawn to someone? Do you race to fill silence? Or do you slow down, let the silence do something? Because in the language of lust, silence isn't the absence of words. It's where the words get their power. Now let's talk about how lust lives in our phones, because the language didn't disappear when we stopped speaking face to face. It just evolved. It got quieter, more coded, sometimes even more intense. And if we're being honest, maybe a little harder to navigate. Lust online isn't just about sending nudes or trading flirty texts. It's about what happens in the pauses between replies, the way a message is crafted or left unsent, the meaning behind a "what are you doing" at 11:52 p.m. when that person hasn't checked in all week. Think about how many times you've stared at a typing bubble, waiting, imagining what was about to come through, and then it disappears. No message, just anticipation cut short. That's digital tension. That's how this language works now. On platforms like Instagram or Snapchat, it's the story view that lingers too long. The like on a photo from 6 months ago. The follow, unfollow, follow dance that makes no logical sense but stirs something anyway. And the funny part? None of it is direct. No one's really saying anything. But something's being said. Technology has made lust even more psychological. We don't just react to what someone does. We react to what they might be doing, what they could mean, what they're holding back. Sexting takes this to another level. Some people find it awkward or forced, others see it as its own art form. But at its core, sexting isn't about being explicit. It's about permission and pacing, knowing when to push, when to hold, when to leave just enough blank space for the other person's imagination to fill in the rest. And let's not forget, it's not always mutual. Sometimes digital lust is one-sided, misread, or misused. That's when things veer into manipulation, or worse, harassment. The language becomes distorted, the cues get ignored. That's where people lose the thread completely. So how do you stay fluent in this version of the language? You pay attention. You ask yourself what story your digital presence is telling. Are you reaching out because you're genuinely drawn to someone, or because you're bored? Are you keeping someone on the hook with vague replies and late-night likes, but no intention to connect? Digital lust can feel low stakes because there's no physical touch. But in some ways, it's even more vulnerable because it plays out in our private spaces, on screens we hold inches from our face, at hours when no one else is watching. So, here's the real question. What are you communicating when you don't even realize you're saying anything? That's the digital dialect. And whether you speak it intentionally or not, someone out there is already reading between your lines. Let's get into how gender plays a role in the way lust is expressed and received. Because even though lust is universal, the way we're taught to speak it often depends on who we are, how we were raised, and what the world expects from us. From early on, boys and girls are given different instructions about desire. Boys are often encouraged to be bold, to chase, to express their wants clearly, even aggressively. Girls, on the other hand, are taught to be selective, passive, even mysterious. The result? Two people who might feel the same thing, but express it in completely different ways. This plays out all the time, in conversations where one person comes off as disinterested, but they're really just playing it safe. Or in moments where someone seems too forward, when they're actually just trying to be seen. But this isn't just about men and women. It's about how all of us carry a mix of energy, some of it assertive, some receptive, some that shifts depending on who we're with. Have you ever noticed that around certain people, you soften without meaning to? Or the opposite, you become more confident, more direct, even if that's not usually your style. That's not about gender roles. That's about chemistry, about how people activate different parts of us. And lust, at its core, often plays in that space between contrast, between tension and safety, mystery and familiarity. A lot of people mistake that contrast for gender difference. But really, it's just about polarity, that invisible pull between two different but complementary energies. This also explains why lust doesn't follow a formula. There's no script that works every time. Because people don't fit into boxes. Some women lead, some men wait. Some people shift from moment to moment. And some don't identify within that binary at all. One study published in Archives of Sexual Behavior found that when it comes to arousal patterns, women were more likely to show responsiveness to a wide range of stimuli, regardless of gender, whereas men tended to show more specificity. The point here isn't about narrowing people into statistics, but recognizing that desire is deeply personal, even while being biologically influenced. So the idea that only men lust visually, or that only women crave emotional connection, that's old thinking, oversimplified, and honestly, not very helpful. The better question is, how were you taught to express desire? Were you encouraged to own it, or were you taught to hide it? And how does that show up now, in the way you text, the way you flirt, the way you wait for someone else to make the first move? Because gender may shape the tools we're given, but it doesn't dictate how we use them. You speak the language of lust in your own accent. The key is learning how to hear it in others, and how to recognize your own voice when it shows up. So far, we've talked about how lust speaks, how it lives in glances, in silence, in suggestion. But here's where we have to slow down and be honest, because the same language that draws people in can also cross lines when it stops being mutual. This part matters, because if you're not aware of consent, awareness, and emotional safety, lust turns from communication into pressure. And once that shift happens, it's no longer connection, it's control. Let's make it clear. Desire itself isn't wrong. Feeling attraction, tension, or wanting someone isn't the problem. The issue starts when that desire disregards the other person's comfort, space, or willingness to engage. Maybe you've seen it happen. A conversation that started out playful, then kept going even when the energy changed. Someone not picking up that the vibe had cooled. Someone testing boundaries under the excuse of just flirting. Sometimes it's obvious, but often it's not. It's the hand that lingers too long. The message that keeps coming after no reply. The compliment that starts feeling like a trap. The teasing that turns into emotional baiting. And for a lot of people, the line gets blurry because we don't really teach this stuff. We talk about lust like it's instinct, like it can't be helped. But that's not true. Instinct might spark it, but behavior is a choice. Here's the reality. Reading signals is part of speaking this language. And if you're only listening to your own, you're not actually speaking to someone, you're speaking at them. There's also the question of power. If someone feels obligated to return interest because of who you are or what you control in their life, then their response isn't fully theirs. That throws the whole dynamic off. It makes consent murky. It makes every signal feel rehearsed, like something they're performing just to stay safe or be polite. Lust without respect becomes performance. And once you're performing, there's no connection left to speak of. So how do you stay aware? You pay attention to more than your own pulse. You notice body language, not to decode it like a trick, but to sense when someone's open or when they're retreating. You listen to tone. You respect distance. You take silence seriously. And above all, you accept no as a complete sentence, even if it's unspoken. This doesn't kill the mood. It actually makes space for trust, which is what gives lust the freedom to build in the first place. Because the best version of lust, the one that lingers, the one that feels real, is the kind that's not just shared, it's chosen. If you've made it this far, then you probably realize something by now. Lust doesn't just happen to us. We participate in it, sometimes without meaning to, sometimes carelessly, sometimes with purpose we don't want to admit. So this part is about choosing to speak that language on purpose, instead of on autopilot. Because when you understand how powerful it is, how easily it can mislead or misrepresent, you start to ask yourself, what am I actually communicating right now? Let's say you're texting someone you're interested in. You've got that back and forth going. The rhythm's good. Maybe you're being playful. Maybe you're teasing a little. Pause and ask, am I drawing this person in because I genuinely want connection, or because I need a hit of validation tonight? It's easy to send a flirty message. It's harder to sit with your own loneliness and not use someone else to fill it temporarily. The same applies in person. If you're using eye contact, touch, tone, or presence in a way that's charged, you should be clear with yourself about why. Not every spark needs to be lit just because you can. Not every signal needs to escalate. Intentional lust isn't about holding back. It's about owning the signal you're sending and being ready for what it might stir up in someone else. You're not flirting just to kill boredom. You're not dangling attention just to keep someone orbiting. You're aware that this language moves things. It stirs thoughts. It changes how someone sees you and how they feel about themselves. Have you ever had someone make you feel seen, really seen, and then disappear? It messes with your head, because it wasn't about the compliment or the attention. It was the fact that for a moment, you felt chosen. And then that moment vanished. That's what happens when lust is spoken carelessly. The impact lasts longer than the moment itself. So, how do you speak it with care? You don't play small. You don't over-apologize for desire. But you also don't treat people like mirrors for your ego. You recognize that this language, when used well, can bring two people closer in a way that's honest, charged, and completely electric. But when used selfishly, it leaves a trail. So the next time you find yourself speaking it, through body, through voice, through screen, ask yourself, what do I want to happen next? And am I willing to be responsible for what I've just set in motion? That's where the real fluency begins. Let's pull back for a second and talk about what's underneath all this. The root feeling that drives so much of what we've been exploring. Because when you strip everything else away, the glances, the flirting, the touch, the tension, what remains is that internal ache, that want for something just out of reach. That's what lust often grows from. So the question is, what does longing actually do to us? Psychologically, it sharpens attention. It heightens memory. When you want someone, your brain doesn't just focus on them, it filters the world through them. This isn't just poetic, it's real. Neuroimaging studies have shown that the brain in states of romantic or sexual desire lights up the same regions associated with reward, addiction, and focus, especially the ventral tegmental area, which is rich in dopamine activity. That's why when you're longing, you don't feel like yourself. Your thoughts loop. You check your phone without realizing it. You replay conversations, dissect tones, imagine next moves, and every little signal, every breadcrumb feels bigger than it probably is. Lust attaches itself to uncertainty. It feeds on delay, on absence, on the promise of what might be. That's what makes it both thrilling and frustrating. You want resolution, but the fire lives in the waiting. Have you noticed how often people chase what they can't fully have? How someone becomes more desirable because they're unavailable or distant or inconsistent? It's not always about the person. It's about the feeling they trigger, the pursuit, the fantasy, the pull. And sometimes, if we're honest, the longing has nothing to do with them at all. It's about something missing in ourselves. Lust becomes a container for all the feelings we don't know where else to put. Our boredom, our loneliness, our need to feel chosen, seen, wanted. So when that text finally comes through, or that glance finally lands, or that kiss finally happens, it's not just about that moment, it's about all the waiting that came before it. But here's the catch. Longing is intoxicating and also slippery. The thing we wanted so badly can lose its shine the moment we get it. Not because it wasn't real, but because we confused the high of anticipation with the depth of connection. So ask yourself, what are you really longing for? Is it touch? Is it closeness? Is it to be desired? Or is it to desire? That answer will tell you a lot more than any flirting tip or body language cue ever could. By now, you've probably started thinking about your own patterns, how you speak this language, who you've said it to, knowingly or not. That's the part most people never pause to consider. They focus on the reaction they get, but not the message they're sending. Because lust doesn't just express attraction, it reveals you. It shows how you approach power, how you handle silence, how comfortable you are with closeness or with distance. It tells on you in small ways, in how you hold a gaze, in how quickly you reply, in whether you push or wait, in how you handle being wanted, and how you behave when you want someone back. And maybe the most important part, it shows whether you're aware that someone is listening. The language of lust isn't dangerous because it's intense. It's dangerous when it's unexamined, when it gets spoken on autopilot. When people send signals they don't mean, or worse, signals they mean but won't own. So if anything from this made you pause, good, that's the point. Because the next time you catch yourself locking eyes too long, or sending a message that toes the line, or lingering in a space that feels charged, ask yourself, what am I actually saying right now? And am I prepared for what this conversation might turn into? Every signal carries weight. Every moment can leave a mark. So speak carefully, speak honestly, and when you speak in that language, mean it. Because someone's always listening, even in the silence.